Hey everybody, this is Joey Batkoski back at you again with episode 2 from the Sober Shift. First and foremost, I want to thank every single person that has shown me support and love. Me and my wife both have received an overwhelming number of direct messages, people that are sharing the link to the first episode, kind of going over my personal recovery journey. I feel overwhelmed with gratitude, just super blessed, and I can't thank everyone enough. So I just wanted to thank everybody. It means more to me than anyone could ever know. And rolling right into the second episode, the topic that I wanted to go over today is how to identify and overcome triggers. I know for me personally, I really didn't understand what a trigger was when I first started off early in recovery. I didn't understand the impact of certain triggers, or for sure not how to identify them and to make changes on how to cope with those and how to overcome those. So I think this is going to be super helpful, not only for people early on in recovery, but maybe people who have been clean for some time. So what I want to do here is I'm going to actually be presenting. So I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get started. So I'm going to present. All right, here we are. So identifying and overcoming triggers. I have a hashtag quit to not quit. We'll get into that in a little bit. But first and foremost, what are triggers? So the formal definition of a trigger is external or internal cues that cause cravings or negative emotions linked to past substance abuse. And the way that I kind of think of triggers are broken down into essentially four different categories. So the first category would be emotional. So think of this as emotions such as stress, sadness, anger, loneliness. For me, a big trigger for me in the emotional category would definitely have to be anxiety. Anxiety is a big part of my story. And so that was a very, very big trigger for me starting out and even today, 5 years down the road in recovery. Second would be environmental. So think if anyone's been in the rooms of recovery before, you've definitely heard people, places, and things. So that essentially covers the environmental category of a trigger. Uh, Physical, so think of these as any type of like what's your body trying to tell you. So if you're fatigued, if you're in pain, if you're hungry. So even the way your body physically feels can be a trigger that could possibly derail you in your recovery journey. So we want to be mindful of what our body is trying to tell us. And then fourth is definitely celebratory. So think about parties, holidays, rewarding yourself. So I used to always, early on, I would call them my drug coupons in my active addiction. So anything that happened to me that was worth celebrating, or you could even use celebratory or any negative connotation. So I could be walking down the street. If I stepped over a crack in the road, that would be a drug coupon. Oh, my day's just not going right. I felt like Eeyore with like the gray cloud kind of hanging over me the entire time. So to recap, emotional for me would be anxiety, environmental, all the above, people, places, things for sure. One thing in environmental that I would put at probably top of the list would be two things. So money. So having access to money was a big trigger for me early on. And then also music. So music, I love music. And I've had to almost completely switch what I listen to and what I let into my ears. Of course, now I tend to kind of flip flop back and forth. I'm not perfect. I will listen to stuff that, would cause me a trigger early on in my recovery, but I've learned how to overcome that in a small way. But yeah, definitely money and music. Physical, I would say anytime I'm in pain. So I mean, literally last night I had the worst headache of my entire life, and even 5 years clean and sober, the fleeting thought of, man, using would take care of this, which is scary, but at the same time, all it was a fleeting thought. I didn't obsess over it like I used to. I didn't compulse, so it wasn't a compulsion to have to go use. And then celebratory. So we talked about my drug coupon story. So yeah, for sure. All four of these, I have different types of triggers in all four of these categories. So how do people identify these triggers? So the first one is self-reflection. So a big one to me is being able to write things down because I want to get out of my own head. And the way that I get out of my own head is being able to sit down, write out, you know, about different times that I've felt the urge to use. So questions that I like to ask myself when I'm journaling is, what was I feeling exactly when I had that urge to use? Where was I? Who was I with? So this will start the process of being able for yourself to be able to identify through self-reflection and journaling, how were you feeling? Where exactly were you? Physical location when you had those feelings, and then who you were with. And then, moving on to patterns and red flags. So to identify, it's always good practice to look for recurring themes in your triggers. So being able to notice, hey, whenever I'm in the car and I turn on this certain Spotify station, I get these thoughts that I just can't get out of my head about using, or they remind me of a time when I was using, is a big one for me, a big pattern and a big red flag of, hey, I need to change this Spotify station quick. And then body awareness. So physical responses such as like racing heart, tension, and then the big thing for me was kind of like cognitive behavioral therapy. So being very self-aware of the thoughts that you're thinking, because I'm a true believer in whatever you're thinking is eventually going to turn into feelings. And then if you let those feelings fester, they're going to turn into certain emotions. And then those emotions are going to lead you to action. So if you can cut off and be aware of what you're actually thinking in real time and be able to shift your mindset pretty quickly, then you won't let it go down that entire funnel of where your thoughts, feelings, emotions turn into actions. So those are different ways in my personal experience that I've been able to start, and I keep on identifying new triggers as well. So how to identify triggers, self-reflection, look for patterns and red flags, and then just being aware of what you're thinking and being able to try and stop that thought process before it goes too far down the rabbit hole. Now that we're able to come up with certain ways to identify triggers, we know what triggers are, we know the categories of the different types of triggers. Now we can start talking about different strategies to overcome triggers. So the first strategy to overcome triggers would be avoidance. Now, obviously, you can only avoid but so much. So I would say avoidance when possible. So this includes, removing toxic people or situations from your life. So removing those, you know, quote unquote friends of yours that you thought had your best interest in heart, and you can identify those pretty quickly, right? I know from personal experience, a using buddy of mine, we would use and we would help each other out when the other person didn't have money. I just intuitively, and just from a person of who I am to my core, I'm codependent. I used to call it loyal, but I would say I'm codependent. So I always wanted to be this people pleaser. And if that meant helping other people out, other addicts get what they needed, I thought I was doing something good. So I vividly remember one of the last straws for me, as wild as was, and of all the different rock bottoms I hit, I was just at my tail end. I remember I called this quote unquote friend of mine to ask them to help me out because I didn't have any access to what I was trying to get. and they told me no, they couldn't help me out. And it made me so mad that I immediately identified like, hey, this person has never been good for me. And that was another turning point in my road to recovery. So just being able to remove those toxic people or situations in your life is a big one. And then another big one is, especially early on in recovery, is just simply declining invites to environments where substances are present. I know it's hard. I know, when you're early on in sobriety, you don't want to isolate, so you want to be able to go out and do things, but it is essential to avoid those places and environments such as bars. For me, it was golf courses, anywhere that you would see people just drinking, having a good time, and just relating those two together. So just being able to set boundaries with other people and just telling them straight up, like, I don't think it's good for me to go to that place or that environment. So avoidance is one, and then healthy coping mechanisms. So if you can see here, I look stressed out. I look like I'm exhausted. That's because that was the first 5K that I ever ran. So being able to replace the bad habits with good ones. So that's what I did. I know that I was about a year clean, and this was like peak COVID. I was sitting at the house. I was just working at home, which I was blessed enough to be able to do. The family was home, and I was just getting super stressed out. Yeah, I was just inside of my head, couldn't stop thinking. And so I decided to go up to a local gym that I noticed some cars at during COVID and popped my head in and asked if I was able to work out. And so we were able to make that happen, started working out, and it's a big part of my recovery now. I work out 5 times a week. I actually, for a short stint, I actually helped coach some CrossFit classes. So that's been a huge part of my recovery is, replacing, those bad habits with something good. And also going back a little bit, so deep breathing or grounding techniques for emotional triggers. And as I mentioned time and time again, anxiety is a big part of my story. So just learning, like box breathing, breathing in 4 seconds, holding it 4 seconds, breathing out 4 seconds, holding that for 4 seconds has been a game changer for me. So different breathing or grounding techniques can be super important when it comes to developing those healthy coping mechanisms. Then here, build a support system. So as I mentioned, I'm blessed. My wife, for some odd reason, stuck it out with me through my active addiction. She is a lot stronger than anyone I ever have known. And I have two beautiful daughters to thank her for. So that's like my main support system. But then again, getting a sponsor, right? Getting someone who has worked the 12 steps of recovery and that can be a guide and show you how to work those steps is super important. And then going to different support groups. So I used to go to NA all the time, AA all the time. And I mentioned in my first video, I was invited to celebrate recovery at my local church. So those support groups, so having like-minded individuals being able to relate to you when you share something absolutely insane or it would seem insane to a, I guess, relatively normal person. Because if you shared some of the thoughts, or if I shared some of the thoughts that I was thinking on a regular basis to just my wife, she would look at me probably with three heads and think that I'm insane, that I'm crazy. But other addicts, they have some similar experiences, so they're able to relate and give some experience, strength, and hope that otherwise other people just wouldn't be able to relate and be able to share any type of experiences and how they overcame those thoughts. And then accountability partners, super important. So something different than a sponsor, people that might be in the rooms of NA, AA. I know one of my biggest accountability partner is a pastor from my church that I meet with on a weekly basis on Thursdays at a local coffee shop. And honestly, not just him, but I know a lot of people early on in recovery, there's this stigma around addiction still. So they might be a little bit hesitant of letting people know that they're in recovery. For me, it was the exact opposite. I wanted to let almost everyone know that I was in recovery because to me, that held me accountable to the people that I surrounded myself with. For instance, if I let everyone know and we decide to go to a minor league baseball game where they serve alcohol and they saw some behavior from me that wasn't quite right, then they knew what was going on and they could help me out in that situation. So I always let people know. It just made me personally feel better that people knew that I was in recovery and I surrounded myself with people that knew that as well so that they could be kind of my ad hoc accountability partners when I'm out and about. And then for spiritual tools, super, super important for me personally. Prayer. So I know like when I first started coming into the rooms, you know, I didn't know what I was. I didn't know if I was agnostic. I didn't have any idea, but I remember someone with a lot more years of clean time once told me, "Hey, when you get home, I know you're not fully bought into this prayer thing, but what I want you to do is get down on your knees, put your shoes as far as you can underneath your bed. And while you're down there at night doing that, and when you get up in the morning to get those shoes, I want you to just pray. You don't have to know who you're praying to, what you're praying for. And one of the most simple things that I learned in my second recovery center was a simple prayer that was simply, please help me. I don't know how to do this myself. Please help me. And that simple prayer would almost every single time give me this sense of security and comfort that I just cannot explain. So prayer has been super important to me. And then we have meditation. So to me, it was explained praying is when you're talking, and then meditation is more when you're listening. So I love to listen for God's words and for Him to speak to me. So being in meditation is super important as well, because I think, and it's a known thing, especially in the business world, especially in sales, the profession that I'm in. You want to talk 20% of the time and you want to listen 80% of the time. So I can't underestimate the importance of meditation as well. And then I also go to the Bible for inspiration, because the Bible, to me, all it is a love story, right? So a Bible verse that pops up into my head for spiritual tools and it gives me comfort is 1 Corinthians 10:13. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. And that always just gives me this sense of relief that he's not going to give me anything that I can't handle. And especially with his help, everything's going to be okay. And then we're getting into my hashtag. I know I told you at the beginning, quit to not quit. So to me, this boils down into surrender. So letting go isn't a loss, it's the beginning of a deeper, more meaningful journey. So I know at first in early recovery, the thought, I remember someone told me in a meeting one time, was the only thing that has to change is everything. And to me, that was super overwhelming. Like, I'm going to have to change literally everything to be able to be successful in this. But then accompanied by the other, one day at a time, all I have to do is focus on that one day at a time. If I can get one day down, shavings make a pile, right? So comparing it to the Christian philosophy and in Luke 9:23-24, which says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses it for me will save it. So, in the same way, the quit to not quit emphasizes that true lasting transformation often requires surrender. So, I just wanted to kind of end with that and kind of explain exactly. what that meant. But I'm very interested and intrigued if anyone is listening to this and anyone who could share and comment what type of triggers they might be experiencing, and maybe share some different ways that they've identified triggers and maybe overcome or overcame those triggers. I would be super interested in hearing from everyone. So I appreciate it very much. Once again, the feeling of gratitude and just how much everything means to me, I can't say it enough. But thank you all, and I look forward to episode 3. And until next time, peace.